They called it paradise, a palace of silk, song and fragrance. But behind the latticed walls of gold, paradise had no doors. Only locks, only silence. The harem was the empire's most secret city, guarded by shadows and built on obedience. To outsiders, it shimmered with luxury. To the women inside, it was a prison lined with velvet and perfume. Here, beauty was not a gift. It was a contract. The smoother the skin, the higher the price. Every glance was an examination, every smile a survival strategy. Thousands of women taken from conquered lands, traded by fathers, gifted to emperors, learned that pleasure and pain were separated by a single breath. At night, the torches burned low, and music drifted through the corridors. But beneath the soft melodies, another rhythm pulsed, the muffled sob of women who had seen what happens when favor fades. Because in these empires, beauty was worshipped, but women were not. Behind every jeweled veil and silken gown lay a system designed to control desire through fear. And tonight, we lift that veil to see the world of concubines not as fantasy, but as history's most gilded form of slavery. From the deserts of Persia to the marble palaces of Istanbul, empires built monuments not only for power, but for possession. Behind every throne, beyond the eyes of the world, lay a second empire, the harem. To some it was a symbol of luxury, a garden of jewels and silk. But to those within it was a golden labyrinth, a world where every smile was studied, every breath monitored, and every heartbeat belonged to the crown. The myth of the harem has survived centuries, whispered in poetry, painted in oil, romanticized in film. But the truth was far colder. These were not palaces of pleasure. They were factories of obedience. Each harem functioned like a machine. At the top sat the Queen Mother, the only woman allowed to hold power without fear of replacement. Beneath her, the favored concubines, each competing for the emperor's gaze. Below them, hundreds, sometimes thousands of girls known as odalisques, trained from childhood to serve, entertain, and obey. For every woman who entered, there were 10 waiting outside the walls, hoping to be chosen. Most did not come willingly. Many were captured in wars, stolen from villages, and sold in markets as gifts fit for kings. Others were given by families seeking status or survival. Some were kidnapped from foreign lands: Circassian, Greek, Armenian, Persian, Chinese. Their beauty turned into currency. They arrived under banners of silk, but were greeted with silence. The first thing they were taught was not how to dance, but how not to speak. The training began immediately. Young concubines learned to walk in measured steps, to bow without breaking eye contact, to smile on command. Tutors instructed them in poetry, music, and etiquette, not for education, but for control. Every gesture, every glance, every word was rehearsed. They were sculpted into perfection, because perfection was profitable. Luxury became the disguise of captivity. The women slept on velvet but never owned their dreams. They bathed in rosewater but washed away freedom. They were dressed in gold not because they were valued, but because they were owned. The harem's architecture reflected its purpose. Every empire designed its own version of control. In the Ottoman Topkapi Palace, the harem-esque corridors were narrow and curved, deliberately built so the women could never see beyond a few steps ahead. Their windows were latticed with gold screens that allowed them to look out, but prevented anyone from seeing in. Even the gardens, lush with fountains and flowers, were surrounded by walls too high for escape. Beauty was the camouflage of confinement. In China's Forbidden City, the emperor's concubines lived in compounds divided by rank, the favored ones in the inner court, the forgotten in shadowed quarters known as the cold palaces. The cold palaces were where unwanted women were sent to fade away. Their food was rationed, their names erased from record, some froze to death in winter. Their beauty had expired, their existence was no longer necessary. In Persia and Mughal India, the same pattern repeated. Artists painted harems as places of music and laughter, women reclining by pools, playing instruments. But the artists were men. The women's songs were rarely of joy. They were hymns to survival melodies that hid meaning in metaphors. The illusion of paradise depended on obedience. Each empire perfected it. The women were divided, isolated, and made to compete. Friendship was dangerous, jealousy was encouraged. An accidental glance at the wrong guard could cost a life. A whispered secret could end in exile. They learned quickly. Trust was fatal. Even the act of love was strategic. To be chosen by the emperor was an honor that could turn to terror overnight. If a concubine pleased him, she might receive jewels, servants, or even her own chamber. If she displeased him, she could vanish by dawn. Favor was survival, love was performance. The eunuchs, the castrated men who guarded the harems, enforced the system. They were both protectors and captors, loyal to the emperor and feared by the women. Their loyalty came from their loss. They had no families, no heirs, no ambitions beyond serving power. They patrolled the halls with quiet precision, ensuring that silence remained sacred. Punishment was part of the paradise. The threat of the discipline chambers lingered in every whisper. A concubine caught breaking rules could be confined to her quarters for weeks, beaten with silk cords, or, worse, strangled under the pretense of divine correction. The methods were gentle only in name. Still within these walls, some women learned to play the game. The most intelligent concubines turned survival into strategy. They used wit as weapon, charm as defense, knowledge as armor. A poem recited at the right moment, a gesture timed with precision, could shift power in their favor. Behind every emperor's decision stood a woman who understood that control often hides behind a smile. But for most, the harem remained an empire of waiting, waiting to be chosen, waiting to be remembered, waiting to die. The corridors echoed not with music, but with whispers of those who had been erased. Every perfume that lingered in the air was a reminder of another woman who once wore it, whose scent outlasted her name. And so the illusion endured. The world outside saw gold and laughter. Inside it was rules and fear. The harem was called paradise because no one dared call it what it truly was: captivity with luxury, obedience wrapped in silk. The empire built its order on their silence, and as long as they smiled, the illusion of paradise was complete. In the world of empires, desire was never free. It was managed, measured, and punished. Behind every curtain of silk lay another chamber, one the songs never mentioned. The women called it many names: the silent room, the pool of tears, the chamber of discipline. It was where beauty ended and obedience began. To the outsiders, the harem was a paradise of music and perfume. But deep within its marble corridors there existed rooms that were always cold. No laughter reached them, no music dared echo. Only the sound of silk sliding over stone, the final sound before a woman disappeared. In the Ottoman palaces, it was said that the harem's most dangerous beauty was not its women, but its silence. The sultans ruled thousands, but feared one thing above all: disobedience from within their own walls. A jealous glance, a whispered plot, even a question could be treated as treason. And for treason, there was no mercy. The discipline chambers were never marked on palace maps. They were hidden behind carved wooden doors and guarded by eunuchs sworn to secrecy. The chambers were lined with marble to muffle sound. Their floors sloped toward drains, practical, efficient, merciless. Inside these rooms, punishments were precise. A favored concubine who spoke out of turn might be confined in darkness, forced to stand for hours with chains too light to break the skin, but heavy enough to break the mind. Others were given the silken correction, a method designed to kill without leaving a mark. When Sultan Ibrahim feared betrayal, he ordered his concubines examined for loyalty. Dozens were accused of conspiracy. Their only crime was beauty that drew too much attention. They were taken to the gardens at night, tied with silken cords, and drowned in the Bosphorus so quietly that even the waves seemed ashamed. The next morning new girls were brought to replace them, as if the water had cleansed the palace. To the empire, this was not cruelty, it was order. The Sultan was the shadow of God on earth. To question his desire was blasphemy. Every act of torture was justified as divine discipline, every death as purification. They called it mercy, the kind that kills softly. In the Ming dynasty's forbidden city, the same logic thrived behind red walls. The emperor's concubines lived under constant scrutiny. Displeasure was a death sentence. Some were suffocated under silk quilts, others locked in mirrored rooms, forced to stare at their reflection, until they broke. The mirrors were not decoration, they were instruments of control. A woman who looked too long saw herself fade, her identity dissolving into the empire's will. The punishment extended beyond the body. Psychological torment was the empire's favorite tool. Concubines were pitted against one another, accused of poisoning rivals, of cursing the emperor's offspring, of seducing the wrong official. Investigations were brutal performances of power. Eunuchs interrogated them in whispers, using gentle words to mask brutal intent. The condemned often confessed just to stop hearing their own names spoken like accusations. Some punishments were designed to humiliate rather than kill. In the Ottoman harem, women accused of jealousy were forced to wear the veil of shame, an iron mask shaped like a beautiful face, gilded and smiling. They would walk the halls, the metal cutting into their skin, while others were ordered to bow as they passed. The message was clear: beauty that disobeyed must be turned into spectacle. In Persia, chroniclers described the sleeping boxes, wooden coffins in which disobedient concubines were locked for days, sometimes weeks. They were given just enough air to survive, just enough water to hope. When released, they returned broken, obedient, silent. The court called it spiritual correction. Even the eunuchs were not free from this machinery of terror. Their loyalty was absolute because failure meant the same fate. A eunuch who sympathized with a punished concubine could be executed alongside her. They became the perfect instruments mutilated men enforcing mutilation on women. The empire ran on their shared ruin. But perhaps the most perverse punishment of all was invisibility. In many empires, a concubine who displeased the ruler wasn't executed, she was erased. Her name was removed from records, her quarters reassigned, her existence forbidden to be mentioned. She would spend her remaining years in the cold rooms, windowless cells where forgotten women lived among echoes. Servants were forbidden to speak to them. Food was left in silence. Death came as the only form of acknowledgement. These punishments weren't spontaneous cruelty, they were policy. A system perfected through centuries, refined by fear, justified by faith. The sultans, emperors, and shahs believed they ruled through divine right, and that divine right extended to the control of women's bodies. The harem became both sanctuary and prison, a reflection of the empire's soul, beautiful on the outside, brutal within. And yet, amidst this horror, there were survivors who learned to adapt. Some concubines turned their fear into strategy. They memorized the guards' patterns, the sounds of the eunuch's steps, the timing of the torches. They hid their intelligence behind submission. They learned that sometimes silence spoke louder than rebellion. One Ottoman chronicle tells of a concubine named Mahidevran who narrowly escaped death after being accused of jealousy. Instead of pleading innocence, she knelt before the Sultan and whispered, "If my love angers you, then let it serve you." Her calm defiance disarmed him. She lived but only by transforming her terror into performance. The empire rewarded her obedience but never forgot her near defiance. These women lived under rules that were older than their names, rules written not in ink but in fear. They knew that survival depended on mastering contradiction, appearing soft yet strong, devoted yet distant, visible yet invisible. The chamber of discipline taught them that freedom was an illusion, but illusion itself could be a weapon. Outside the palace walls, the world envied them, envied the jewels, the silks, the glimpses of luxury in miniature paintings. No one saw the drains beneath the marble, or the masks stored in hidden closets. No one heard the whisper that echoed through the halls each night. Beauty is a curse that must be punished to be preserved. The empire called it order. The world called it mystery. The women called it survival. The harem was not just a prison, it was a parliament of fear. Behind its silken curtains, power was traded like perfume, its scent intoxicating, its cost unbearable. Every touch, every glance, every word spoken in the emperor's presence carried consequences. Here, desire was a weapon, one that could build kingdoms or destroy lives in a single night. To the outside world, these women were ornaments. But inside, they were players in a game older than the empire itself, a game where affection meant survival and indifference meant death. The emperor's gaze could crown or condemn. The women learned to read the smallest gestures, a lifted brow, a pause in speech, the way a servant lingered too long by another's door. Each night, the politics of desire unfolded in ritual precision. The eunuchs delivered a scented handkerchief, the emperor's silent invitation. The chosen concubine would bathe in rose water, her body powdered with crushed pearls, her wrists brushed with amber oil. She would walk barefoot through corridors lined with shadows, aware that 1,000 unseen eyes followed her. Behind every curtain, rivals prayed for her failure. The emperor's chamber was a world unto itself, a place where pleasure disguised interrogation. Conversations were never casual. Questions about poetry or philosophy were tests of obedience. A wrong answer, a moment of hesitation, could plant suspicion. The emperor did not just desire, he studied. For many concubines, intimacy became performance. They smiled through terror, kissed through fear. Every sigh was rehearsed, every word measured. The goal was not love, it was survival. Those who forgot that difference vanished. Jealousy was the empire's favorite poison. It needed no antidote, only witnesses. The palace thrived on rivalry. Servants whispered rumors about favoritism, eunuchs fanned flames of envy, and the Queen Mother, the most powerful woman in the empire, orchestrated it all with surgical precision. By dividing the harem, she controlled it. By making women fear each other, she ensured none could unite against her. Some concubines played the game better than their masters. In the Ottoman Empire, Harem Sultan, once a captive slave, rose from concubine to queen. Her weapon was not beauty, but intellect. She wrote letters to foreign rulers, counseled the Sultan, and orchestrated alliances from within her gilded cell. Yet even she ruled under the shadow of jealousy. Her influence inspired admiration and hatred alike. For every harem who triumphed, 100 others paid for her example with blood. The same story repeated across continents. In the Chinese Ming court, a concubine named Consort Wang became infamous not for rebellion, but for love. She bore the emperor's child and was briefly favored. But when the empress accused her of arrogance, her attendants were executed and her child taken. The emperor's affection could not save her. She was declared ungrateful to grace and exiled to the cold palace. The punishment was elegant: isolation until madness. She died whispering lullabies to an empty room. Desire was never private, it was governance. The emperor's relationships dictated political alliances, inheritance, and legitimacy. A favored concubine could shape the empire's future through a single birth. Her son might become heir, her family might gain wealth and titles. But that power came with a curse. Her value was tied to fertility. Once she failed to bear a child, her favor withered. In many empires, infertility was treated not as misfortune, but as treason. Doctors, often men, examined concubines for divine defects. Some were forced to drink herbal poisons meant to cleanse their wombs. Others were branded with oils that burned their skin, believed to purify the body for renewal. These rituals were not medicine, they were public humiliation disguised as piety. The manipulation of love went beyond the physical. The harem's hierarchy turned emotion into economy. The emperor's affection could bankrupt families or make them kings. Provinces were traded, officials promoted, wars postponed, all depending on whose smile the emperor remembered that night. And yet the emperor himself was a prisoner of his own system. Surrounded by beauty, he trusted no one. Every concubine was a potential spy, every whisper a conspiracy. Pleasure became paranoia. The same walls that confined the women also trapped him in isolation, drowning in a sea of affection he could never believe was real. That was the genius of imperial cruelty. It enslaved both master and servant. The women lost freedom, the ruler lost peace. Their suffering became the foundation of his power, and his loneliness became the proof of theirs. The politics of desire extended even to death. A concubine who bore a son could be executed once the child grew old enough to threaten the succession. Her death secured the dynasty. Her love was rewritten as ambition, her loyalty as deceit. In the Persian Safavid court, chroniclers recorded a chilling ritual known as the Night of Selection. Before each royal heir's coronation, the Shah ordered the removal of all concubines who had once shared his bed. Their bodies were burned in secret, their ashes scattered into rose gardens. To outsiders, the gardens symbolized purity. To those who knew, they smelled like memory. In this world, affection was politics and pain was policy. The empire didn't just control women's bodies, it colonized their emotions. Every act of tenderness was monitored, every tear was proof of weakness, even laughter was dangerous, it could be interpreted as mockery. And yet, amid this machinery of desire, some women found ways to reclaim fragments of power. They wrote poems disguised as love songs, embedding rebellion in metaphor. They hid letters beneath carpets, smuggled secrets through servants, sent coded messages in embroidery. Their defiance was invisible and therefore unstoppable. In the end, the harem was not just a place of control, it was a mirror reflecting the empire's soul. The emperor ruled millions but feared one truth: that power built on possession can never know love. The women learned it first. They knew that devotion demanded silence and silence demanded pain. But they also knew something their rulers never did, that even in captivity, desire could not be fully owned. They had been reduced to instruments of power, yet within them lived a quiet, undefeated will, the refusal to be forgotten. And though history tried to bury their names beneath marble and myth, their stories still whisper through the corridors of time. Because in every empire where love was used as a weapon, someone always learned to fight back with memory. Every empire has its ghosts, but the most restless ones do not haunt battlefields, they haunt bedrooms. The stories of the concubines who obeyed are written in scrolls and paintings. The stories of those who defied are buried under stone. Their punishment was not just death, it was erasure. To disobey inside the harem was not rebellion, it was blasphemy. These women were called ungrateful to grace, unworthy of favor, impure in devotion. Their crime was not treason against the emperor, but treason against silence. They had broken the most sacred rule. They had remembered that they were human. Records from the Ottoman and Ming courts describe the punishment of forgotten women with chilling precision. They were not executed in public. Their deaths were whispered like sins. A eunuch would arrive at night carrying a silk cord or a basin of water. No blood was to be spilled. Blood was sacred. The strangling silk was called the cord of mercy. The drowning pool was called the mirror of purity. The words made cruelty sound holy. In 1648, when Sultan Ibrahim first suspected betrayal among his concubines, he ordered them all gathered. Dozens of women, some pregnant, some barely past childhood, were tied with silk scarves and thrown into the sea. Their bodies drifted beneath the palace walls while the court musicians played to drown the sound of waves. By morning, their names had been erased from the registry. Historians called it the cleansing of the harem. The same logic ruled in China's Forbidden City. A concubine who spoke against the emperor's decisions could be sealed in her chamber's walls plastered shut, food left outside until her voice faded. The cold palace was not only a punishment, it was a grave built for the living. Some women scratched their names into the walls before death, hoping someone might one day remember. Most didn't. In Persia, the Shah's concubines who violated decorum faced the Red Judgment. They were forced to walk barefoot over carpets soaked in pomegranate dye symbolic of blood they were not allowed to shed. Afterward, they were paraded before the court and declared purified through pain. But purification was only the beginning. Many were then led to secret gardens and strangled beneath trees that still bloom today. The justification was always moral. The empire told itself it was preserving order. The church told itself it was preserving virtue. The court told itself it was preserving beauty. But what they were really preserving was fear. Because a single woman who spoke, who resisted, who reminded the world that she was more than an ornament, that woman was a threat to the illusion that kept the empire alive. Every disappearance carried a lesson. The surviving concubines learned to fold their defiance into poetry, to hide truth in metaphor. One song from the Ming court survives, written anonymously, preserved by servants. The moon watches through the lattice, counting the women who no longer breathe. Silk binds softer than rope, but leaves a mark the gods can see. It's a lullaby for ghosts, a song sung by survivors for those who couldn't whisper anymore. Some rebellions were not written in words, but in silence. In the Ottoman records, one concubine refused food for 40 days after being condemned to isolation. Her name was never recorded, only the note, "She died standing." Another in Persia drowned herself in the royal fountain after being ordered to serve again the man who had killed her sister. Her death was ruled accidental, a slip upon the marble. History learned to disguise murder as misfortune. Even the women who lived long enough to grow old were erased in subtler ways. When their beauty faded, they were transferred to remote estates or convent-like palaces, forbidden to speak of their past. Some became caretakers to younger girls, living reminders of what obedience could not save. Others simply vanished into folklore, reduced to symbols of vanity or temptation. The woman becomes the warning, her life becomes the lesson. Beneath palaces across Asia and the Middle East, archaeologists have uncovered mass graves, dozens of female skeletons buried together, stripped of jewelry, bones fractured in ways consistent with strangulation. Official records describe no battle there. The stones remember what the scrolls deny, but perhaps the cruelest punishment was not physical, it was historical. To forget someone completely is the final act of power. Empires perfected it. They erased names from ledgers, portraits from walls, and memories from rituals. Even their descendants were forbidden to speak of them. The silence became generational, a wound passed down through centuries. And yet, fragments survive. In hidden libraries, in whispered family legends, in the private diaries of eunuchs who could no longer bear their guilt. One such diary, found in a 17th century Ottoman archive, ends with a single line. "I have buried more women than I have ever loved." These forgotten voices were not rare. They were the rule. For every celebrated concubine who rose to power, hundreds died unnamed, unburied, unremembered. Their punishment was the price of disobedience, the empire's warning to every woman who came after. Beauty is temporary, but submission is eternal. And still, the women endured. Even when they could not fight, they watched. Even when they could not speak, they remembered. The empire could control their deaths, but not what they thought in the final moment. Somewhere between the breath and the silence, resistance survived, because even erased names leave shadows, even forgotten stories leave echoes. The walls that silenced them are now museums. The marble floors that absorbed their footsteps now echo under tourists' shoes. The empire thought it buried them, but the truth never stays buried. Their ghosts are not vengeance, they are memory. A whisper reminding the world that history was built not only by kings who ruled, but by women who suffered, loved, resisted, and paid for it with everything. The forgotten concubines are not gone. They are simply waiting in stories, in ruins, in every silence that dares to speak again. Empires fall, thrones crumble, palaces turn to dust. Yet the systems they built often outlive them, not in law, but in thought. The walls of the harems may have cracked centuries ago, but the logic that built them still lingers in the corners of modern life. The idea that beauty must obey, that desire must be controlled, that women must earn value through silence, these are the invisible empires that never truly ended. History tells us the harems died with their kings, but the truth is quieter and more dangerous. The same patterns repeat, reshaped by time. The iron mask became makeup, the silk cord became shame, the eunuch's watchful eye became the public gaze, social, moral, digital. The architecture of obedience simply changed materials. In the modern world, the concubine's gilded cage has been replaced by subtler prisons. The expectation to be flawless, submissive, desirable, but never defiant, it's a language we still speak without knowing. Every advertisement that worships perfection, every comment policing how women dress, every whisper about who is worthy of attention, these are the echoes of empire. The concubine's beauty was her only defense. Today, it's her currency. The competition that once played out behind palace curtains now plays out on screens, measured in likes, views, and comparisons. The fear of being replaced hasn't vanished, it's simply been democratized. The empire no longer needs a sultan to enforce obedience. The crowd does it for him. And just like before, silence is still rewarded. Women are told to smile through discomfort, to forgive faster, to endure more. Pain remains the proof of virtue. The old theology of suffering has evolved into the modern myth of resilience. Strong woman, they say, but often what they mean is silent survivor. The words changed, the expectation didn't. But there is something the empires did not anticipate: memory. The very stories they buried have become weapons against their legacy. What was once whispered in fear is now spoken in millions of voices. The concubines they silenced are being resurrected not as victims, but as evidence of survival. Historians, artists, and filmmakers are unearthing the documents, letters, and poems hidden for centuries. We are discovering that the women once dismissed as ornaments were historians of pain. Their stories are maps tracing how control travels through generations, changing shape but never purpose. Modern scholars now see the harem not as a relic of exotic fantasy, but as a prototype for institutionalized control, a system that used intimacy to govern, beauty to subdue, and silence to sanctify. Its true horror was not the cruelty of individual rulers, but the perfection of its design. That design still echoes in the way power treats women's bodies today, in the laws that dictate what they can wear, in the headlines that shame them for their choices, in the workplaces that praise them for grace but not for anger. The language of the harem became the grammar of gender. The palace became the planet. Yet, amid this darkness, something remarkable has happened. The descendants of those silenced women, literal or spiritual, have begun to speak. Across cultures, women are reclaiming their voices not through rebellion alone, but through storytelling. Every poem, documentary, protest, and confession chips away at the empire's ghost. Every act of honesty becomes an unshackling. The beauty once used against them is now their banner. Artists are turning the harem's imagery inside out, painting women not as passive objects of desire, but as witnesses to history. Writers are taking back the narrative, revealing what the chronicles concealed. The iron mask, the silk cord, the mirrored room. These are no longer symbols of shame, but memorials of truth. In museums, tourists walk through reconstructed harems, marveling at architecture without realizing the cruelty it concealed. But the air still remembers. The tiles still echo. And somewhere in that silence, if you listen carefully, you can almost hear the whispers, not of submission, but of defiance that refused to die. Because even in captivity, these women built legacies of strength. Their silence was not emptiness, it was endurance. Every unspoken word was a seed waiting for the right century to bloom. That century is now. The modern world owes them more than curiosity, it owes them acknowledgement. They were not shadows behind kings. They were witnesses, prisoners, survivors, historians of pain, who kept civilization's darkest truths alive through the only thing they still controlled: memory. If the empire's cruelty was built on the idea that women could be owned, then its collapse began the moment they refused to be forgotten. The punishment designed to erase them ended up immortalizing them. Every story told about them today, every documentary, every script, every voiceover, is not entertainment, it's justice. History is not only written by the victors, sometimes it's rewritten by the survivors. And when those survivors could not speak, time did it for them. The same walls that once silenced them now display their portraits. The same stories that once justified their deaths now expose their truth. So when we speak of harems today, we must remember they were never about desire. They were about control. Desire was just the disguise. And when we look at modern life, at the industries built on perfection, at the systems that profit from obedience, we must ask, how much of the empire still survives in us? Because history doesn't vanish when the palaces do. It lingers in thought, in expectation, in silence. The concubines are gone, but the question they leave behind still burns. What does freedom mean in a world that still demands beauty before voice? Empires collapse, but control adapts. Yet for the first time in history, the silence that once protected power now protects truth. The women who could not scream in marble corridors now speak through us, their stories, their pain, their endurance echoing louder than any throne. And if you listen closely, past the noise of the present, You'll hear them, the sound of chains unfastening, the whisper of silk turning into wind. The empire is gone, but the voices remain.